Greetings, fellow Baldur's Gate 3 fans and aficionados. Yesterday, we were very fortunate to have been blessed with yet another information-packed trailer concerning Baldur's Gate 3, which will be released on August 31st of this year. The first big announcement is, of course, that none other than the famous and prolific British actor Jason Isaacs will be voicing the new villain, Lord Enver Gortash. I think he's an excellent choice for the role, and his voice hits just the right combination of gravitas and villainy to play a corrupt leader in Baldur's Gate 3. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, as we've seen new footage of things for the first time ever, both of the city of Baldur's Gate and of the various plot-related players and plot-related information. And we will be breaking down this information here for you, offering explanations and theories for this most recent of trailers. The first big information drop is that of Lord Enver Gortash himself, a new villain and major player in the story. He is not a character from pen and paper, and no sourcebook makes mention of him. So we know that Larian have created this character for the purposes of the story and plot of Baldur's Gate 3. But what can we say about him, based on the limited information in the trailer? Looking at him purely in terms of his presentation, he appears to be highly adept with magic, as both his attire and the jewelry he wears screams mage. I suspect that he might also originally be from Kalasham, perhaps from the great city of Kalamport itself, as his appearance and style suggests this. Kalasham is a region in the southwest of Faerun, very much reminiscent of something such as the tales of the 1001 Nights of Arabia, a desert land infused by magic to a far greater degree than most places in Faerun. It is not uncommon here to see mages traveling about on flying carpets, for example, in the capital city of Kalamport. That Gortash is likely a mage is indicated by his sinister-looking robe, which is embroidered with golden demonic or perhaps infernal heads of a very peculiar style that project regality. Then there is the ornate jewelry he is wearing on at least one hand, including a not-so-subtly placed amethyst of considerable size on the top of his right hand. I have to speculate here, but the amethyst is almost certainly magical, and it might be what is sometimes referred to as a Yun stone. Now, normally, Yun stones are worn on the head, or float around the head, but it would not be impossible to wear such a gem on a gauntlet-like glove of the sort that Gortash is boasting, especially if Larian is willing to take certain liberties with lore. Yun stones store magical energy that can be utilized by their owners for various purposes. And even if this is not a Yun stone, I would bet money that this amethyst is in fact magical. Now, one thing that has been plainly stated by Larian, at least in text, and who knows if it's really true, is that Gortash was allegedly raised by a devil. It is stated as follows: a politician raised by a devil. What could go wrong? One could speculate in any number of ways on this, but it seems highly unlikely that a devil would raise a human child, and much more likely that he has received some boon or training from the devils of the Nine Hells. That he has an association with the Nine Hells is again suggested by his attire, with the devilish pins and skulls adorning his robe. One thing I find somewhat odd, though, is the pre-release revelation that Gortash is a major villain. Now, of course, he presents as villainous by his mannerisms alone, and we would have likely guessed this regardless, but it would not have been as readily apparent without the trailer that he is in cahoots with Ketheric Thorm, and possibly the Absolute as a consequence. But given this revelation, there's a lot that we can work with, given to us by the trailer itself. Although we have to speculate on the ultimate origin of the character called Lord Enver Gortash, I think we can draw much more solid conclusions about how he is involved in the plot of Baldur's Gate 3. In this trailer, we physically see for the first time none other than Grand Duke Lord Ravengard. This is very important, as I will explain in short. But first we need to understand how the city of Baldur's Gate is governed. All cities in Faerun have different customs of governance, and Baldur's Gate is no exception in this regard. Baldur's Gate is ruled by the Council of four influential and powerful individuals who are elected for life. Of these, Baldur is probably the most important in general, and to the story of Baldur's Gate 3 specifically. Grand Duke Ravengard is a lifelong member of the Flaming Fists, and got to his position as Grand Duke through persistence, intelligence, and fighting prowess. And our first sighting of the Grand Duke is not just important because it is the first time seeing him physically, but above all, because of its implications. If you have played through Baldur's Gate 3 Early Access, then you know of the area where you encountered the Burning Inn. There are flaming fist soldiers outside, and there is an important person trapped in the inn, an elven councilwoman whom you can rescue that rewards you with some weapons for her rescue, and informs you that Grand Duke Ravengard has in fact been taken prisoner by the Drow, brought westward, presumably to the Moonrise Towers. This is the PC's first encounter with the name of the Grand Duke, and the PC is still in Chapter 1, and therefore has not yet been given the opportunity to visit the city of Baldur's Gate. This means that the Grand Duke's presence in the city is necessarily post-rescue, or at least post-escape from the Drow. Now here is where our powers of deduction will come in handy. Let's look at what the Grand Duke is doing, seemingly elevating Enver Gortash to some position of great authority, and from Gortash's own words, he refers to the city as his. This appears to be some very official ceremony wherein Gortash is called upon by the Duke to act as the city's protector, and by implication, possibly ruler. This would mean that the Grand Duke and the Council of Four are ceding tremendous political power to an interloper, obviously not from Baldur's Gate. But how did this happen? We know the PC and his companions are fortunate in that they are uniquely not slaves to the magical illithid tadpoles implanted in them, in contrast to the many others whom they encounter on their journey, and who serve the Absolute obediently. Now we don't know what is happening to the kidnapped Duke before we rescue him, and it is entirely possible, perhaps even likely, that he was whisked away to Moonrise Towers and implanted with a tadpole, and now serves the Absolute loyally, without even being aware of it. And honestly, I cannot think of any other possibility as to why the Grand Duke would be ceding so much control over to someone so obviously untrustworthy. We can also see Gale during the ceremony, further proof that the party is now in Baldur's Gate, and that the Grand Duke was either rescued by the party, or that he has escaped. Either way, it is far too much of a coincidence of timing that the Grand Duke would be raising someone of the likes as Gortash up to power just after returning to Baldur's Gate. There's almost no way that the Absolute is not involved in this. Something is very, very fishy. And on top of this, towards the end of the video, we discover that Gortash is not just any power-hungry tyrant, but rather one that is directly in alliance with the now well-known and infamous Ketheric Thorm. After all of the trials and tribulations that the city of Baldur's Gate has gone through, particularly over the last 2 centuries, allowing someone to just take over the city would be the last thing on the mind of the Council of Four, and Duke Ravengard in particular. Unraveling this plot and the many layers of conspiracy will be a major point of interest upon full release. Now, in addition to the conspiracies and plots, we do get to see the city of Baldur's Gate in some detail for the first time, as envisioned by Larian Studios. And I have to say, it looks very good. But one of the most noticeable additions to the city is not some aspect of the city itself, but the giant automatons that we see throughout various scenes, that look both very large and powerful, and seemingly serve at the behest of Enver Gortash. Now, we've seen automatons before, in Baldur's Gate 3 Early Access, in the Arcane Tower in the Underdark, but nothing like this. There are 2 possible explanations for their existence here. One more likely is that, as I have suggested, Gortash is a powerful mage, and used his arcane knowledge to craft them and enlist them in the service of his reign. Or possibly, and this is the less likely theory, they come from the artificers of the god Gond, who is the god of invention and craft. There is a museum in Baldur's Gate called the House of Wonders, which is curated by the priesthood of Gond, who has on more than one occasion worked on commission, crafting powerful mechanical devices, and such constructs would not be outside of their purview. They also do not fit the standard criteria of golems, so that idea can be done away with. Regardless, they seem to be in the employment of Gortash, so whether he has made them himself, or he has procured them from elsewhere, they seem to be there to enforce his rule. There's also the presence of the Flaming Fist, a mercenary company based in Baldur's Gate that serves as its watchmen and protectors, and we can see them in some of the images acting as guards, as well as the company's banner, so we can fully expect them to play an important role in the politics of Baldur's Gate. And who knows, perhaps swaying them to our side might aid in combating the Absolute. Indeed, in some of the images, they appear to be abusing their power, possibly in the service of Gortash. As for the other images, in one of them we can see a statue of someone who is presumably Baldur, a legendary explorer and the de facto founder of the settlement that would later go on to become Baldur's Gate, and whom Duke Ravengard invokes upon swearing Gortash into office. And in another image we can see the harbor of Baldur's Gate, and in another we can see a bell tower, again with a flaming fist banner, as well as a colorful building that somewhat reminds me of a building in the first Baldur's Gate called Sorcerer's Sundries, a magical shop, though the surrounding buildings do not resemble anything from the first game. All in all, I'm very pleased with how the city of Baldur's Gate looks, and it'll be very fun exploring and discovering it. A final hypothetical thought or theory concerning Gortash and his involvement with the Absolute. At the end of the video, when complaining to Ketheric Thorm about a problem that is not yet under control, and by that presumably he means the PC and his companions, Thorm rather forcefully states that he does not answer to Gortash, which is something we could have likely surmised on our own, regardless of this statement. But what is interesting concerning this is the supposition that Gortash on his own might have little connection or even allegiance to the Absolute, but rather seeks to boost his own power and position in the world and uses the Absolute's organization as a power base to do so. He is, in this interpretation, very much a man for himself, in it for himself, with little ideological conviction, something that sits in stark contrast to a character such as Ketheric Thorm, who is religious to his core, or at least was. Seen from this vantage point, maybe we will be able to change Gortash's alliance and shift it to the player's side, given the right incentives. Some food for thought. In any event, thank you very much indeed for tuning in, and if you like the content, please leave a like, comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel, as it really helps the channel's growth. Until the next time, take care.